College Football on the Line with Steve Dace from Michigan Podcast. Please join him right there on YouTube or your favorite audio platform. When we look at bowl season, I love it. I enjoy it. I enjoy the games for what they are. They're entertainment vehicles and entertainment events. They do count in the standings in regards to a team's overall record, so that shouldn't be dismissed by those people that call them exhibitions. For most of the teams, they will be watched by more people in that particular game than they have been the entire season by far. But in regards to the conferences, so this is when conference allegiances and pride come to the forefront. Who is the best conference? Who is the worst conference? How much stock do you put in bowl play?
I don't know, and I'm a traditionalist. I actually think the system we had pre-BCS is better than what we have right now, where we had sometimes some years we'd have 9 games on New Year's Day. And you could have years where, in 1970, January 1st of 1978, Notre Dame went from number 5 to number 1. January 1st, 1984, Miami went from number 4 to number 1. You could have years like that. And I think the number one problem we have with college football now is we don't have enough meaningful games. So while this year, I think it's pretty clear cut, there's 3 teams that are probably better than everybody else. And so there wasn't even much of a debate for number 4. I still think if you're going to have a playoff, then I think you can't be a little bit pregnant. I think you have to have a full-fledged, your sport has to be structured to incentivize that playoff. What we have going on in college football right now, Mark, is there's just not enough meaningful games. And that's more true in the bowls than any place else. And if you go back to the BCS era, 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago, there was a lot of conference pride about getting that second BCS bid. We literally saw the Big 12, I believe, rig a game. I really believe that. That Kansas-Texas game in 2004, that was the worst offensive pass interference call in the history of offensive pass interference calls. And Mark Mangino was right to call it out afterwards. I think they absolutely went Operation Hook 'em Horn right there, right there in Lawrence, Kansas, because it mattered to get that bid. And those games were highly attended. And I think what's happened now is, I thought Nick Saban was correct in what he said the other day in the Citrus Bowl press avail. The fact guys sit out, don't sit out bowl games other than the playoff, tells you what the players think. We had multiple guys sit out a New Year's Six Bowl last year. I'm not so sure if they weren't told ahead of time Urban Meyer was leaving. I don't know that some Ohio State guys don't sit out at the Rose Bowl. I don't know. But I think we're in this era now where we don't have a playoff. You're right to call it an invitational. There's no way of knowing how to get in. So what I think is, if you're going to have a playoff, then you have to have a season that isn't a dichotomy from the playoff. But if we're going to have a playoff, then let's incentivize tougher scheduling. More, give people more of a chance to think. When we didn't have a lot of parity in college basketball until they went to 64 teams. When they did that in 1985, the amount of parity in college basketball exploded. Why? Because there was more opportunity. Now, in 1985, that very first year they went to 64 teams in the NCAA tournament, 3 number 1 seeds made it to the Final Four. All right. So St. John's, Georgetown, and Memphis State were all number 1 seeds, and they made it to the Final Four. And everybody back then said, "Oh, why'd we expand? Just watered it down. We still ended up with 3 number 1 seeds. It wasn't that big of a deal." Well, that was just year 1. But once the culture filtered down into the soil, the water table of college basketball, because what ended up happening in 1985 is 3 number 1 seeds made the Final Four, but it was the 8th seed, Villanova. They were the 8th seed in the region, and I know that team well because we were the number 1 seed. They didn't make it, Michigan, and they beat us in the second round. All right. And so that was the first time a number 1 seed didn't make out of the first weekend, and it was us. So I know that one pretty well. All right. And they won the thing. And then when other people said, hey, because, when John Wooden was winning 10 out of 12 at UCLA, Villanova doesn't even make an NCAA tournament. And so when schools started seeing little Catholic schools like Villanova can just get in and still win this thing, and then a couple years later, Kansas is a 6th seed with Danny Manning and the Miracles. They win the tournament. The more and more schools that saw, we don't have to, we don't have to have Patrick Ewing and, the Fab Five and we can, every dog can have his day. Wichita State was in the Final Four a few years ago. The amount of investment that now goes on at even the smallest schools in college basketball has helped with the parity, and it's made it more competitive. And that's the problem we have in football right now is we don't have enough competitive games and games that matter. And I think that's the only way to alleviate that is to have, if you're going to have a playoff, you have a true playoff where I know if I do this, like if you're Virginia, going in, you're a 28-point underdog. When you're down 10-0, 14-0, you're like, if we come back, it's great, but we're not going to the playoff. We're going to the Orange Bowl, whether we win, we come back and win, or whether we lose 75-0. On the other hand, if you're Virginia in that game and you come back and win and you're in the playoff, that absolutely changes things. And it also, when a Clemson, Ohio State, and LSU know they can go into those games and lose and still make the playoff, you can't go into the regional finals. When Kentucky was undefeated a few years ago and nearly lost to Notre Dame in the Elite Eight, do you remember that? Yep. They don't have to go in there and say, well, we lose to Notre Dame here in the Elite Eight. Everybody knows because of our analytics, we're still in the Final Four. No, that's where the human element comes in. The puckering comes in. All right. What we have right now is a Politburo star chamber. They don't have any rhyme or reason. They just have the outcome that they want. And on a weekly basis, they just reverse engineer it to get what they want. And that's the worst possible scenario in my view.
Yeah, because coming into the weekend, they had two scenarios that they needed to deal with. One didn't come into fruition because Utah lost, but they had Oklahoma one spot behind Utah, but they had Oklahoma playing a higher seeded team. So they could have played that either way. Had Utah won, they could have justified moving Oklahoma ahead of them had they wanted to, because they were playing a 7th-ranked Baylor team instead of a 13th-ranked Oregon team. Or they could have said, we had Utah in front. They both won their championship games. Utah's going to stay in front. Same thing with Ohio State, LSU. They could have had justification to say we're keeping Ohio State number one because they were one spot ahead, or they could use that rate. You didn't know how razor close they were, but we knew how razor close they were coming into this weekend. Therefore, we can justify the LSU move to number one.
I agree. And you look at what they did with Alabama. They actually did what they should have done with Alabama right after Tua got hurt. They almost screwed themselves with how they handled that. I mean, imagine if Matt Jones only throws one pick six against Auburn and Alabama wins. Then you're going to drop him after that? We'd be talking about Alabama's back in without winning their division with a backup quarter. This is, folks, here's a simple question. Do you think the same people that trust in and rely upon the NCAA to fairly govern collegiate athletics can be trusted to fairly govern the college football playoff with absolutely no transparency or accountability at all? And I'll just leave it with that.
I also point to, if they are entrusted with selecting the 4 best teams in the country, then they should also be entrusted with and have shown us the ability to seed them correctly. So they have yet to select a number one team that went on to win the national championship. Right. So they don't know the 4. If they don't know who 1 through 4 is, then how do they know the 4 best? If people argue, well, those must be the 4 best teams in the country because they got selected by the committee. Well, then they would have been able to order them correctly. They have yet to do that.
And one final thing I have on this, we didn't have 3 number 1 seeds make the Final Four in the NCAA tournament again after the first year. It didn't happen again until 2008. From 1986 until 2008, we did not have more than 2 number 1 seeds in a Final Four. So, or that was the first time all 4 number 1 seeds made it. I'm sorry. We had 3 number 1 seeds make it only a couple of times, but only once have all 4 number 1 seeds made it, and that was in 2008. So, again, and you still have a pecking order in college basketball. We know every year Duke's going to be good. We know every year North Carolina is going to be good, right? Kansas is going to be good. We know that. But, I think Duke's only been to 1 Final Four since they started recruiting one and dones. And so there's more of an opportunity for upward mobility. And I think the problem that in college basketball, what we've done is we've created an inequality of outcomes as best we can. or an equality of opportunity, I should say, as best we can. What college football is trying to do is create an equality of outcomes. And that's why I use the Politburo analogy. I use that term on purpose. Its historical meaning.
Incentivizing the non-conference scheduling would point me to Oregon, because had they not scheduled Auburn,
right,
they might be in the playoff right now.
So if Oregon plays FCS, Team C on opening week, are they in the playoff right now? Probably. Just like the year that Ohio State made it without winning the division. If Penn State doesn't play Pitt on the road that weekend, if Penn State plays, I don't know, pick a MAC school. If Penn State plays Buffalo at home that weekend and wins by 1 point, and they're 12-1, and Ohio State's 11-1, and Penn State beat them and won the division and won the conference, is Penn State in the playoff? Yeah. So you're telling me you didn't pick Ohio State because they're the best team. You picked Ohio State because they didn't lose to Pitt on the road. That's why you picked them. So yeah, we can do this all that we need. You know what? As Steve Rogers once famously said, I can do this all day.
Yes, we could. We certainly could. Steve Deace, Michigan Podcast. Please join him right there.